Stanford University.
We've been working to try to get the back ones online too. It turns out to be a hassle for both technical and legal reasons.
Oh, really? Some people object?
No. It's that up until 2007, I think, the permission slip that you just signed didn't cover online storage.
Oh.
It covered media broadcast.
Right.
But it didn't cover archive storage that could be accessed on the web. So we have to go back to all the people before 2007 and get them to sign a new permission slip.
Right. No, you had me do that.
Yeah, I said you were running right. So that's, it turns out, it's, there's hundreds, so it's a big task. It was like what we did, unfortunately, there's about 10 or so who died. A lot of it try to track down their states, right?
My wife is an art historian, so.
She knows about it.
Just kidding.
Okay, we on? Great. Welcome to the seminar on People, Computers, and Design. I'm Terry Winograd. We'll get right down to business. Next week, we have Wendy Mackay, who is from INRIA, the research center in France, and we've had the privilege of having her here as a visitor. And she'll be talking about her work, which includes work with pen-based computing, multiple kinds of interactions. So that's next week. This week we have Warren Sack. Oh, you don't really... You can put it back on your presentation. Warren Sack, who is from the University of Santa Cruz, and is director there of the Center, Institute, whatever it is, for for digital art and new media. Is that right? And that group, we were talking about it earlier, has a lot of really fascinating different projects going on, which he may talk to you some about, but he's in that sort of intersection of interests, which I find really great for this seminar, which is he's knowledgeable about computers and technology. He's also working with the arts, which is what the center is that he directs, and also in the area of politics. So it brings together all of those in the project. So the project he'll be talking about is about public participation, the use of new media for better governance.
Thank you, Terry. So that's the system. I'm going to talk about Peer-to-PCAST. That's an outgrowth of a collaborative work with my students and colleagues at UC Santa Cruz. So Aphid Stern and Mark Deckert are here today. And when I say we, I mean the three of us. So we've been motivated to build the system because the scientific testimony that the government receives is rarely peer-reviewed. So even if a high-profile scientist comes in and gives testimony, let's say, to the executive branch, and even though their reputation comes from, let's say, peer-reviewed journal articles, what they actually say in that situation isn't actually peer-reviewed. And so we thought, well, we could put together a website that would allow, after the fact, the peers, the scientific peers of those people who are giving the testimony, to have their peers review what they do. So specifically, this is called, the situation that we're interested in is the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. So when I say PCAST, that's the acronym for the President's Council. So we've tried to address this oversight, I think it's an oversight, with a web interface that allows scientific peers, not necessarily present during the testimony, to review the scientific testimony. But before I talk about the Peer-to-PCAST, I sort of feel like I owe Terry and Scott a little progress report. It's been 11 years since I was at this venue. So I'm going to do just a little bit of that. And I just want to say that most of my work, my individual and collaborative research, is an attempt to understand, summarize, visualize, and facilitate online public discussion and exchange. Everything's the wrong size, but we'll survive. So this piece here was my PhD dissertation at MIT, and this is what I was showing 11 years ago. It's called a conversation map, and using techniques from computational linguistics, social network analysis, and information visualization, the conversation map automatically summarizes and produces an interactive diagram of hundreds or thousands of email messages sent to online public discussions. And 2 years ago, Rudolf Frühling, curator of media art at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, asked me to resurrect the conversation map for an exhibition entitled The Art of Participation.
Sunday morning. Yesterday was the opening for Making Things Public.
The second is entitled Agonistics, a language game. It was produced for an exhibition at the ZKM, which is the Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe, Germany, curated by Bruno Latour and Peter Weibel. Agonistics recasts an online discussion as a game. One wins points in two ways. First, by engaging others in dialogue. Posts that garner no replies earn a player no points. Second, one wins points by introducing words or phrases that other discussants take up and reuse. Thus, one wins and graphically moves from the periphery of a circle to the center, and so I guess you can see the interface there, by controlling the vocabulary and capturing the social structure of the discussion. So this design was inspired by Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau's articulation of an agonistic democracy, and is scored in a way akin to how Republican and Democratic strategists think about the word crafting and media strategies they devise for campaigners and office holders.
You are viewing an application of agonistics.
So while the conversation map graphs consensus and collaboration, agonistics highlights the differential status of opinion leaders. Both compute summarizations and visualizations of online discussions, and both constitute a transcoding of theories and ideas from social and political theory into things, or more specifically into the materialized processes of software. The respective theories they're based on are very different, but the transformation of a political theory into a designed process, a designed thing, is the same. So there are two issues of this research that I'd like to emphasize. First is an insight useful for the design of both virtual and physical spaces and institutions. Corporations, communities, collaborations, and disputes can be conceptualized as networks of recurrent conversations and exchanges. And this insight, as I understand it, is one of the main contributions articulated by Terry and Fernando Flores in their 1986 book, Understanding Computers and Cognition, A New Foundation for Design. The second is a point Bruno Latour underlined in the titling of the exhibition, Making Things Public. And more generally, people are organized around things. This is an ancient insight, etymologically written into the word republic. So republic means res publica, the thing of the public.
Winning the game entails gaining
But it's also, so it's an old insight, but it's also a new insight, because this is a lot of science studies. Let's say Langdon Winner's well-known essay on artifacts do have politics is a reflection of this. So consequently, there's no adequate understanding of politics, social or cultural systems, without an imbricated analysis of a system's embedding in a set of material and technical conditions. And I think succinctly this might be rendered as a kind of slogan: no representation without fabrication, or in other words, to know something, you've got to make and unmake things. So these two projects, the conversation map and agonistics, touch on two issues: the order of things and the discourse of order as two essential elements of institutional and improvisational organizations. And I think these issues can mostly be addressed using Terry's inventions. such as the language action perspective and his vision of interaction design.
These are two examples of my work to visualize.
So excuse me for doing this, Terry. I'm going to quote you.
Here is a third
For the 50th anniversary of the Association for Computing Machinery, Terry wrote, "Successful interaction design requires a shift from seeing the machinery to seeing the lives of the people using it. In this human dimension, the relevant factors become hard to quantify, hard to even identify. This difficulty is magnified when we try to look at social consequences. Will the computer lead to a world in which our concept of individual privacy is challenged or changed? Will political power gravitate towards people or institutions who have the most powerful communications technologies or who aggregate control over media?" So using the analogy that interaction designers are to software engineers what architects are to civil engineers, Terry articulates a new role for designers concerned with the social consequences of software. Terry elaborates further by reminding us that in design disciplines, trade-offs are difficult to identify and to measure because they rest on human needs, desires, and values. So certainly contemporary software design work pays attention to human needs and desires, and increasingly value-based design is being explored. I'd like to add to this list of concerns by borrowing from a line of work that's been pursued in the social sciences for the past century, but with an especial fervor in the past few decades under the rubric of new institutionalism. In short, I think interaction design can be strengthened by adding to it a form of institutional analysis. Let's see, where are we? There we go. So, what's an institution from the perspective of this new institutionalism? According to Nobel Prize-winning economist and the Hoover Institution's Bartlett Burnap Senior Fellow, Douglas North, quote, "Institutions are the rules of the game in a society. They are a guide to human interaction, so that when we wish to greet friends on the street, drive an automobile, buy oranges, borrow money, form a business, bury our dead, or whatever, we know how to perform these tasks. Institutions can be formal, like the US Constitution, or informal, like how do you tell a story to a child?" As social scientist Ronald Jesperson has pointed out, institution and institutionalization are core concepts of general sociology, and for over a century within the field of sociology, institutions have been conceptualized as an organized, established procedure. These special procedures are often represented as the constituent rules of society, the rules of the game. And there's a kind of interesting borrowing that goes back and forth between social science and computer science here in these areas. So if you look at big overviews, like Elinor Ostrom's overview of all this work on new institutionalism, she won the Nobel Prize a couple years ago. She includes various pieces of artificial intelligence. So Stanford's been seminal in its contributions to this kind of work in sociology, management, and organizational behavior. Key Stanford faculty contributors include James Marsh, Walter Powell. In my mind, even short explanations of this work of institutionalism make it plain that it's about interaction. Well, it's possible to conceptualize organizations using Winograd and Flores' framework that render them as networks of recurrent conversations. I think the new institutionalism complements the language action perspective because it makes us also consider the social, political, and economic context of these recurrent conversations as they're shaped by various rules. So far be it from me, someone who's really devoted to mapping out conversations, to say we shouldn't be paying attention to that. I'm just saying that I think conversations and rules are two things to be attended to simultaneously. Or more specifically, I think the work of interaction design has to also explicitly incorporate an analysis of formal and informal institutions. So as an aside, I think the closest connection, the way to close this connection is around probably the work of John Searle. whose recent book called Making the Social World, The Structure of Human Civilization, is a linchpin for this because Terry and Fernando Flores used speech act theory right in the middle of their stuff. And one way to kind of, I think one way to read understanding, one way to read Terry's 1986 book is as a kind of prescient insofar as that he is using John Searle's tools to do some stuff that John Searle doesn't really get around to doing until 25 years later, until like right now. I think that's pretty. I don't know. It's pretty interesting to go back and look at it. But Searle forgets some stuff. If you read Searle's new work, he really seems to think that institutions are established through simply text and talk. So he's interested in what he calls status function declarations, which take the form of X counts as Y in context C. So, for example, the Constitution of the United States makes it the case by declaration that any presidential candidate who receives the majority of votes in the Electoral College counts as the president-elect. But he seems to think these things that establish institutions, like the president-elect, can only happen through text and talk, but not technology. And I think what the 86 book does really, it fills that lacuna. We can see why technology also has this engendering effect for institutions. So I think it's possible to hinge together interaction design and institutional analysis. And I think it's important right now when we start to think about politics and government as being translated into software. And Jane Fountain at the University of Massachusetts Amherst has been really advocating for this view for quite a while between e-government and this new institutionalism. But I think the need has only become more acute in the past few years. Consider a recent article by University of Maryland law professor and affiliate fellow at the Stanford Center on Internet and Society, Danielle Citron. She wrote, "The 21st century's automated decision-making systems bring radical change to the administrative state that last century's procedural structures cannot manage. In the past, computer systems helped humans apply rules to individual cases. Now, and here's the astounding part of this, now automated systems have become the primary decision makers. These systems often take human decision making out of the process of terminating individuals' Medicaid, food stamps, and other welfare benefits. Another of these systems targets people for exclusion from air travel. Computer programs identify parents believed to owe child support and instruct state agencies to file collection proceedings against those individuals. Voters are purged from the rolls without notice, and small businesses are deemed ineligible for federal contracts." And this is happening on a software level, not a human level. So translation to code of statutory and regulatory laws is obviously difficult. Some of the things that Citron cites in her article, like the Colorado benefit system, is really making a lot of mistakes. This is hard to do, but you can imagine, well, right, statutory and regulatory law, that might be possible to do with sort of this new field of artificial intelligence in law. And maybe case law can be handled with some stuff from case-based reasoning. But I think the biggest problems lie not in the already well-articulated areas of legal reasoning, but in the more loosely defined areas of informal institutions. Privacy, for example, is an informal institution. Well, it's informal and formal, right? We have certain kinds of laws that govern that as well. But it's a recurrent nightmare for social networking sites like Facebook. So this is just a a Wall Street Journal article from last fall, them trying to dig themselves out of one of the last problems. And it's an entire sub-industry of computer science. And so this is why I think that the truly difficult problems for interaction design in the domain of government concern the translation of political ideas and informal institutions into software. So how do we address these problems? So my proposal inevitably will strike some of you, at least some of you, as quixotic. But I'm gonna make my proposal via an analogy. In the United States, the Republican Party has set up a large number of research centers where academics and party strategists work together to craft the language of the Republican Party. For example, the Hoover Institution here at Stanford is one such institution. Their work results in not only the articulation of core values, strategies, and policies of the party, but also a painstakingly researched set of words and phrases that Republican candidates and office holders alike are expected to use to communicate these values and strategies to the media and the public, and thereby stay on message. So the Berkeley cognitive scientist George Lakoff noticed that the Democratic Party had no such analogous research centers, and so he set one up to communicate their obviously very different values and ideals to the media and the public. And Lakoff's Rockridge Institute is now gone, but his point is still a good one. Academics can contribute to the language of politics by using new tools, techniques, and theories to clearly state values and ideals and help craft the language of politics. So my argument is that at least since Plato's Republic, there's been a lot of thinking about the ideals of politics that's been developed outside of the rough and tumble of day-to-day politics. And this kind of political philosophy, if you will, has been disparaged as unrealistic by politicians and publics alike, but it's the kind of work that ends up in the load-bearing, structural foundations when new political institutions are built. Those who drafted the Constitution of the United States, for example, used a lot of ideas from political philosophy of the day to put together what is now seen as the blueprint for the architecture of the government. My suggestion for interaction design in the service of better government is therefore simply this. Now that the language of politics is inextricably woven into the code of the net, a new form of political theory should be pursued by academics. The translation of democratic ideals and values from prose into programs. And in short, my proposal is this. Not only should we be studying the political implications of existing software, we should also be designing and writing software that articulates democratic ideals so that industry and government alike have gold standard benchmarks for what they aim to achieve when they go about building large-scale platforms that increasingly mediate our personal, professional, social, and political institutions. So the rest of my talk is an attempt to illustrate, well, what do I mean? What kind of work would this be then? And I'm going to do that with this system we've been working on that we call Peer-to-PCAST, a website that's essentially a rewrite of the website that the Executive Office of the President has put together for the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. See that? Yeah, I guess. Okay, so I'm just going to play our little video
Peer-to-PCAST
demo
is a peer
here.
review system that puts contextual information from the scientific
getting
literature
nothing.
side by side with expert testimony.
Let's see if I can reload that. Or actually, I have it locally. Yeah, we'll just do it locally. Here we go. Go.
Peer-to-PCAST is a peer review system that puts contextual information from the scientific literature side by side with expert testimony.
Can you do the level
Peer-to-PCAST
up?
consists of a number of movable, resizable, and minimizable panels. The timeline shows a representation of the slides, speakers, and reviewer comments, and can be used for navigation. The slides panel shows slides from the talk, and the video panel has controls for navigating the video and adjusting the volume.
By noting two.
The research panel contains links to papers by the current speaker. Clicking on a paper shows the PDF in the viewer panel. The PDF link allows for downloading of the PDF, and clicking on an author name shows a co-authorship graph in the viewer panel. Finally, the comment box makes a Reddit comment with a link to the position in the video when the user started typing. Within the green bar, we can navigate to other PCAST sessions, or navigate to the Reddit post for the session we are currently viewing. Let's make a comment now. At this point in the video, Mario Molina is discussing the burning of agricultural wastes. An interesting alternative technology is biochar. As you can see, the comment appears in the timeline. And if we navigate to the Reddit post, we can look at discussion about the PCAST session. We can reply to comments, vote on comments, or navigate back to the particular of the portion of the talk where the comment was made.
Question in connection with the climate change.
So it
issue.
links back to this particular
Uh,
moment in the video.
Thanks for watching.
So what I'm going to try to do to explain like what we did is show a little before and after. Like what does the site look like right now for PCAST, and what did we change? But I need to describe a little bit more about the context. That is to say, the political, the legislative context in which you're working, because there are certain aspects of the site that work today in order to fulfill, for example, the FACA, the Federal Advisory Committees Act of 1972, which asks that these kinds of meetings, and there's the PCAST is one of about 1,000 federal advisory committees. These kinds of meetings need to be publicly accessible, they need to be publicized, and so forth. So there's certain stuff that you do just in order to respond to the legislative context. But President Obama actually set the bar higher, because in the first few days of his administration, he wrote a memorandum for the heads of the executive departments and agencies entitled Transparency and Open Government. And so in that, he emphasized that government should be transparent, participatory, and collaborative. He wrote, quote, "My administration is committed to creating an unprecedented level of openness in government. We'll work together to ensure the public trust and establish a system of transparency, public participation, and collaboration. Openness will strengthen our democracy and promote efficiency and effectiveness in government." So a good design for the PCAST website, I submit, is one that needs to consider not only how to interpret the formal institutions, like this legislative context in which it works, but also the translate and interpret in software form some of the informal institutions like advisory committees, peer review, the ideals of transparency, participation, collaboration, openness. I mean, what does openness mean as a piece of code? what it kind of sound to, kind of. So my claim is the executive branch did not do a very good job of interpreting these formal and informal institutions in the construction of PCAST's current website, and that this is an opportunity for those of us in academia and research institutions to try to articulate something better. Some of you are saying, this guy is nuts. He wants to spend his time redesigning poorly constructed government websites. Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'm nuts, but I blame it on my students. Why do I blame it on my students? Well, in 2005, Michael Dale, who's not here today, but aphid, Stern, were MFA students, and they noticed that C-SPAN's video archives were terrible and terribly expensive. They decided to do something better than C-SPAN's website, and the result was MetaVid. So MetaVid captures video, audio, and closed caption text on the floor proceedings of the US House and Senate and indexes them so that it's searchable and downloadable by who said what when. So for example, what did Hillary Clinton say about healthcare on the floor of the Senate when she was a senator, right? You can search like that. Website visitors can download, remix, blog, edit, discuss, and annotate transcripts and metadata associated with the video archive. And the current archive extends from January 2006 to now. So, to have a look at some of this stuff, you can see here, we can download it in various kinds of formats. We can embed the video. We can play it along here, and it will follow this transcript here as well. We were sponsored by the Sunlight Foundation, and what's made this kind of cool is that Sunlight Foundation is a foundation devoted to making Congress more transparent with new technologies. They have a whole set of websites that they sponsor, and so they they coordinated, and so we cross-index all that data from different websites. So there's one website, MapLight, that keeps track of campaign contribution stuff. So you can ask, this is a well-formulated query in MetaVid then, speeches on the economic stimulus plan from those who received more than $250,000 from the interest group banks and credit. And that's possible because we get these synergies between websites. So MetaVid is an open video project in all three senses of the term. Open content, open formats, open technologies. Open content, at the metavid.org site, one can download for free any or all of the video of the US House and Senate floor proceedings from January 2006 to the present. Open formats, the downloadable video is encoded in the OGG Theora format, an open source software video codec unencumbered by privately held proprietary codes, patents, or copyrights. And open technology. The site's built entirely with OSS. For example, our servers run on the Fedora GNU Linux operating system. We make extensive use of the VLC media player, and all the custom software we've built is open source and free for anyone else to download. So when we began MetaVid in 2005, it was one of the first open video projects, but now there are a number of such projects, loosely organized under the Open Video Alliance and sustained by a yearly conference, the Open Video Conference. So arguably, MetaVid is a project concerned with openness and transparency, and it's had two primary results. When we first started, C-SPAN tried to stop us. C-SPAN is, of course, the industry-controlled television channel that broadcasts the US House and Senate proceedings live. While content and closed captioning is all recorded and produced by government officials using government equipment, C-SPAN was charging literally thousands of dollars to give the public access to very bad quality archival footage. I think we only avoided C-SPAN's legal challenge because even though we're little old Santa Cruz on the beach, we're part of this gigantic UC system, the University of California system, and I think they sort of, we had this kind of sharp exchange with their vice president of intellectual property, and I thought we were in for it, but they backed down. And that was kind of interesting because ultimately what C-SPAN did was nothing to us. And a few years later, they improved the quality, the indexing, lowered the price of the archival footage. And of course, we can't necessarily take credit for that kind of response. But I think ours was sort of one more nail in the coffin. Really, what I think is this kind of influence is that it shows what academia can do with a small budget, and we can produce something because we're sort of out of the frenzy of real politics, and can try something out and show how it can be done. So one of our advisors for this project, Carl Malmud of publicresource.org, is a total master of this kind of stuff, and he's this kind of a technical jujitsu person. He does these projects that get federal agencies to just move in terms of getting their data out the door. So have a look at his site. Have a look at publicresource.org. The second measurable outcome of this project has been a contribution to the standards and technologies to support open source video on the web. And so thanks to Michael Dale and obviously a number of others, open video solutions now have can be included on a website. So Michael is now at the Wikimedia Foundation, supported by Kaltura, integrating our code base into MediaWiki to support video in Wikipedia and the other sites of the Wikimedia Foundation. So clearly, part of the definition, I would say, of open video is the development and use of open source software. And it seems equally obvious that part of the definition of open government by the Obama administration presupposes a similar relationship to open source software. But if we return now to a consideration of the PCAST website, one could quickly see what looks like a gaffe on the part of GSA, that is the General Services Administration, as it works to find online video solutions for the executive branch. So if we go, what we're looking at now is the actual site that the PCAST is using. Let's see, I want to show you this, I guess. No, I want to show you. Okay, yeah, I just want to show you here. Okay, so if I click on here, I get, you are exiting the White House web server. Okay, this is the archives of the whole thing. And so you're then taken to a third-party commercial site that hosts the video archive. So our question is like, why is the US government using proprietary formats and a third-party commercial site to host the video? This just seems nonsensical if what you're trying to do is something around open government. You know, everything's available here. You can get it, but you get it in Flash video. And there's nothing wrong with Flash, but it's just, it's not open, right? Now, so the current official website, which is what we're looking at right now, although we just moved off to this third-party thing. If we look at the top here, we have submit a public comment, and there's usually two links there. If it's a hearing that's coming up right now, there's one more thing other than email. But what email does is it will launch a mail client to post a message to pcast@ostp.gov, but no subject is defined. It loses completely the thread of where you were. It doesn't know, unless you sit down and document exactly what you're what you're commenting on, what your post is about, there's no way to trace it back, even to the hosting. Now, the other thing that's usually here is what's called Open-PCAST. And that will take you to a discussion forum, which is a little bit better because there's a different discussion forum for every PCAST hearing. So you can narrow it down a little bit. But there are a couple of, we object to several aspects of this feature of the current website. So it seems like a gaffe that the government's decided to use proprietary commercial software when it could use open source software. And despite its name, Open-PCAST is not open source. Let's see.
Is there any question about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is the assumption that the number of people who have quick and easy access to the open formats the same size as the number of people who have access to the proprietary formats? Well, you're worried about the tension between getting it to the most people possible and being pure in the way you do it.
Right. Well, so this is why I think what we're doing is trying to show what could be done. So yeah, I think that's an issue. But you'll also find in DC things lag quite a bit behind, right? So I think probably up until relatively recently, Flash was the right thing. But now, when we're moving to this world of HTML5,
You don't have Flash on that. Can't have it on your iPad.
Can't have it on that. Yeah, I don't. That's another can of worms. But I think some of this stuff totally. I think so. This is why I think of this as a kind of essay in political philosophy. Redoing these sorts of websites is you're trying to show what could be done, and I don't have the same problems. I don't have to deal with the same pragmatics as somebody who's sitting in the executive office of the president just trying to get this thing up and out to a bunch of people. So this is the site that you'd go to if you're not posting your comment via email. You'd go to this site, which is Open-PCAST. It's hosted by another third-party commercial thing, IdeaScale.com. You can license this, but you can't actually look at the algorithms they use, for example, for voting. So you can never really know whether your comment, like how your comment gets there and if it gets voted on, or even whether, how many votes it gets, or even whether it's getting voted on, because you can't open that box. So we're saying, like, well, great. Why don't you could use IdeaScale, but why don't you just use Reddit? Open source. You can rank things. You can do everything that this IdeaScale thing is, except that it's open source. So if you want to look at see what the algorithms are for voting on comments or something like that, it's there. You could just download the source and look at it. IdeaScale, you can't even download the source ever. They make that clear. You can purchase it, but you can't open it. Another thing that Reddit allows that the IdeaScale doesn't is roles. So you can assign somebody a role in the discussion. Somebody who has a little bit more power, somebody who has moderating power. And you can't do that with the IdeaScale thing. So you might think, well, that's democratic. Everybody's got the same role in some of this stuff. Except I think this is where we need to depart from the sort of easy slogan that open government is open source software applied to the needs of government. So for a fully worked out definition of open government, we need to turn to Beth Novick, who produced the first open government system for the US Office of Patent and Trademark immediately prior to the Obama administration. And she called her system Peer-to-Patent, and that's what we're referencing when we say Peer-to-PCAST. We're a tribute to Beth. So she's a professor at the New York Law School, and she was the United States Deputy Chief Technology Officer for Open Government for 2 years, from 2009 to 2011. And she led the White House Open Government Initiative. So it's good to read her book that she published right before that, which is just entitled Wiki Government: How Technology Can Make Government Better, Democracy Stronger, and Citizens More Powerful. According to her, open government is an innovative strategy for changing how government works. By using network technology to connect the public to government and to one another informed by open data, an open government asks for help with solving problems. The end result is more effective institutions and more robust democracy. So understood in this manner, the Obama administration's emphasis on open government is not simply an effort to move away from the Bush era of secrecy to a new age of transparency. Rather, it's an attempt to design new ways to engage the public to participate, collaborate, and innovate with their government. So this has been a difficult point to make, I think, because it's kind of radical itself. So some might confuse this proposal to create an open, collaborative government with the proposals of deliberative democracy. So you've got James Fishkin on campus here, right, who's really been doing a lot around that and how it might get ported to online. But Novick emphasizes the difference. Deliberation is about citizens voicing their views about the government's decisions. Collaboration, in contrast, is about citizens helping to make those decisions. So deliberation is about discussion, collaboration is about action, or more concretely, quote, deliberation requires an agenda for orderly discussion, but collaboration requires breaking down a problem into component parts that can be parceled out and assigned to members of the public and officials. So several years ago, I worked with my colleagues and students around what we called an analysis of the open source software community Python. And so this was Nicolas Duchanot's PhD dissertation at Berkeley. And he's now a scientist at Xerox PARC. And I mean, what became really clear when we did this work, also with colleagues at INRIA, where is Wendy, is that, you know, open source, the kind of fuzzy idea of open source is like everybody's equal, everybody can contribute and things like that. But they're mostly really hierarchically organized things where people have a place both on the hierarchy, but also they have their specializations. And many of you probably have participated in these things, so it's obvious to you. But that's not kind of the discourse that reaches open government, right? I mean, they're very hierarchical. Think about Linux and Linus Torvalds, or think about Guido van Rossum, who is known affectionately in the Python community as the benevolent dictator for life. These are hierarchically organized things, and people have really specific roles to play. So if you're going to conduct a discussion around something that is going to promote open government, best point is that people have to have roles to play. They have to have, you got to divide up the problem. You got to do something. It's not just everybody pitches in and you do the same stuff. So maybe, in fact, when we scratch the surface here, the Obama administration's vision of open government is a lot like open source software if we pay attention to actually what actually happens in these development projects. So we hope to support with Peer-to-PCAST is what Novick calls a collaborative democracy, where people work together on a task that's been decomposed into different parts that people with different skills can address with specific respective expertise. In other words, we're not interested in supporting the, quote, average citizen who would be some sort of generic contributor. Rather, we want scientists with different fields of expertise to contribute using what they know best. To support specific contributions, roles are necessary, and so this is why we suggest to PCAST that they use Reddit rather than IdeaScale. So to further scrutinize the current PCAST website and motivate the changes we've implemented, I want to go back to the Winograd and Flores 1986 book. So first they tell us that any organization is constituted as a network of recurrent conversations. And second, conversations are linked in regular patterns of triggering and breakdown. And third, computers are tools for conducting the network of conversations. So, you know, when we look at something like this, where you click this and you're completely break. I mean, the irony is the link completely unlinks you from the conversation that you're supposed to be connected to. That's like disastrous from this kind of perspective, I think. So if one can understand the PCAST institution, its organization as a network of recurrent conversations, then the current web architecture is, I said disastrous, but let's just say problematic. It interrupts what in linguistics can be referred to as anaphoric reference, that is the means and procedures necessary to elaborate and comment on previous moments of a discussion. So we just attempted to address this by moving stuff to Reddit. And looks like things are a little bit messed up here. But, you know, I guess you saw this in the video, but pretty much I can type in a comment here. I submit the comment, then I can go up here and I can click on here to go to the Reddit that's associated with that, and it shows up here with also a link back to this part of the talk. So it moves me back here. Let me just put that up. Well, I'm having a little technical difficulty here, but you see up here, we're just marking, here's where comments come in. Actually, this is a timeline with comments. This is speakers. These are speaker changes. The color changes are speaker changes. And these are the slides. These are slide changes up here. So it's, we're just indicating where you are in the talk, the whole thing. So, but like I said before, to fully unpack what we're trying to do here, we have to get really specific about the formal institutions, the history of the PCAST, which pretty much goes back to World War II. You all know who Vannevar Bush was, found the NSF. He was essentially the first scientific advisor, although he didn't have that name. It wasn't until Truman's administration where they actually had a PCAST per se. But it's been sort of reinstantiated, and this is kind of an interesting thing. It has to get reinstantiated every administration. And so some administrations, they don't reinstantiate it with full power. So like Ronald Reagan had some folks around, but he never listened to them. You know, it's really wasn't until George H.W. Bush where kind of things come back into play. So the president has a lot of leeway about what is this thing. And so they work at his, with his availability and at his pleasure. But like I said, this is one of 1,000 federal advisory committees. And if you want to sort of look, this is the GSA's listing of them all. And the president's is just the most prestigious of these 1,000. But our hope is like if we do something that looks kind of interesting for PCAST, that some of the other federal advisory committees might have a look, right? So the really kind of difficult thing for me, and I'm going to try to finish up here relatively quickly, but what I've to really explain what we're trying to do with the design of this thing, you kind of have to get into the literature on scientific advisory panels, right? So there's this field of studies, history of science and technology studies. Sheila Jasanoff is a professor who leads that effort at the Harvard Kennedy School. And there's a bunch of people in that area who've spent a lot of time just doing ethnographies of scientific advisory committees and kind of figuring out, well, what makes them work? Where do they fall down? Stuff like that. And so Jasanoff's book entitled just The Fifth Branch, Science Advisors as Policymakers was very important to us as we were trying to think through this. And what's interesting about that when you start to get into that literature, so now we're talking about an informal institution. What is a science advisor? How does one work? There's no laws that says you have to do this or you can't do this. But there are some things that you can garner from this literature that makes it workable or not. Jasanoff says, though their purpose is to address only technical issues, committee meetings therefore serve as forums where scientific as well as political conflicts can be simultaneously negotiated. When the process works, few incentives remain for political adversaries to deconstruct the results or to attack them as bad science. So it's this really interesting teetering, balancing act that they have to do. They're doing policy, but it has to be accepted as science, and it has to be accepted as good science. So what Jasanoff says about the outcome of, let's call it a mixed proceedings, is surprising. So what emerges from a successful recourse to scientific advice is a very special kind of construct, one that many, perhaps most observers accept as science, although it both shapes and is shaped by policy. That such constructs sometimes break down under political pressure is hardly surprising. Their frequent durability is the greater puzzle, for they're founded neither on testable objective truths about nature, as presupposed by the technocratic model of legitimation, nor on the kind of broadly participatory politics envisioned by a liberal democratic theory. So another way to put this in science studies parlance, Jeff Bowker and Lee Starr have this notion of a boundary object, which is an object that can be shared between communities of practice, but that actually means maybe something completely different from one and the other. So you've got to produce, as a successful science advisory committee, a boundary object that can be accepted both by the policymakers but also by the scientists as a legitimate object. So boundary it comes into Jasanoff's analysis as well. For these committees to work, she asserts, there has to be a clear demarcation in the discussion about what is science and what's not science. Who's credentialed to say something and who's not. So what's, if it just blends in with what you might call the random public, you fall down. You're never going to get a boundary object. So, what we're trying to do here is maybe a little ham-handed, but I guess this isn't working for me. But how far? When do the graphs come in? Mark, is it at the end? There we go. Okay. So when somebody appears on camera here, what happens is all of their, as much as we can grab off of Google Scholar of their CV comes up here, and as many PDFs as we can grab of those things are linked right there. So you can click on those and you can actually read the paper right here. I'm not here. That's the slides for the speaker. Let's down off screen right now. And then the other thing that we do is bring up a co-authorship graph, right? So here's this person. Here's kind of how they're located in science. Now you could do this a variety of other ways. Co-citation analysis might be nice and things like that. This is maybe too literal, but what we're trying to do is say to you, who is this person in science? Do they have some kind of legitimacy? Or are they just somebody from left field? And that's what we're trying to get at with that, is to help the committee in its website to patrol that boundary. This isn't just somebody who walked on and said something or other about something. It's not just an opinion. Yeah.
Do you think it would be acceptable to take another step further and put things about who funds their research?
Yeah, I mean, we've been really trying to think about how to leverage some of the existing databases that are out there. So there's a database just called Little Sis, as opposed to Big Brother, which keeps track of sort of everybody who's anybody inside the Beltway and kind of all over. And so you can see those connections. So one of the key people in that is Josh On, who's an artist who did this great site just called They Rule, where you can see board of directors and how they interlock between a variety of corporations. So I mean, we sort of have this placeholder, but I think we got to figure out. I think there's a lot of possibilities there, and obviously any possibility is going to be some sort of caricature of who that person is. But I think something is better than nothing, especially if you know you've got to produce this boundary object, and it has to be a boundary. So. So we build this short CV for all the participants by mining Google Scholar, and then we create this co-authorship graph, and we haven't done this yet, but this is where we're thinking is then somebody who's running, let's say PCAST, should then be able to, by sort of traversing some of these graphs and stuff like that, say, oh, who might want to comment on this person who just showed up? Who is this person's peer in a field, and give them the means to sort of quickly send off an email and say, you know, your colleague just spoke to the President's Council of Science Advisors. Do you have something to say about this? And that's why we have all this other machinery. That's where we want them to come in and post a comment and more or less do a peer review. So we've got sort of the mechanism in place for the automatic creation of accounts. We keep going back and forth whether or not the person, when they're on Reddit posting, should they be anonymous, should they not be anonymous. So those of you who've participated in peer review, you know it comes in lots of different flavors, right? Sometimes you're totally anonymous to everybody, even the other reviewers. Sometimes like if you go to NSF and do this, you're face-to-face with all the other reviewers. I mean, there's
But anonymous to the proposal writer.
But anonymous to the proposal writer, right? Exactly. But you can slice this a lot of different ways, and sort of you then have to, and this is what we're struggling with. We don't have the exact solution, but you know, what is a reinvention of peer review for this particular site? So in conclusion, I've really tried to give you a thumbnail definition of PCAST, provide a brief overview of its history and its current political and legislative context. These contexts entail a set of constraints that need to be met in the design of any website for PCAST. For example, the FACA dictates that meeting agendas be published and that the public have access to the meetings. Over and above these constraints, the Obama administration has raised the bar further by declaring its support for open government, the means to allow citizens to not only see what the government's doing, but also collaborate with the government to solve problems in new ways. And we've also shortly considered the academic literature on the use of scientific advisory committees for policymaking in order to identify the essential functions of a committee like the PCAST. And this is especially the work of Sheila Jasanoff. But our current thing is up at that website, and from there you can also download this journal article that should be published pretty soon in the Journal of Information Polity. So that's what, especially I just want to point again to this, this issue of the production of boundaries and the production of boundary objects that I think play a big role in getting a good website together or supporting that kind of production through the website. So taken together, these constraints, historical, political, legislative, and scientific, can be understood as a set of design criteria for open government websites. Some of these design criteria are directly addressed by prior work in the fields of open source software and open video. Others are addressed by prior work on the design of online discussion platforms and peer review. Using these criteria, we've critiqued the existing PCAST website, where we found differences between the design criteria and the existing website. We've tried to propose some possible alternatives and implemented them in our prototype system called Peer-to-PCAST. And that's where you can find that. And this work, I should acknowledge, has been supported by an NSF Size Award 09126292. And it's just our opinions, right? It's not NSF's opinions. Thank you very much. Yeah, Terry.
One immediate question is, with the peer-to-patent, she went to the patent office and said, do you want to adopt this?
Right.
Are you approaching a similar track where you might get it actually adopted?
Yeah, so Beth Novick's been really nice to us. So when she was there, is when I first got when she was there in the executive office of the president was when I first got the grant. And so I came to her. And I wanted to do this actually for Congress, because I thought out of the MetaVid stuff, we'll do the committee meetings in Congress that have to do with science and technology. And she said, why don't you do our meetings? So we've had a back and forth with her. We kind of went away trying to build for a while. So we go so slow compared to like even them, you know. So there's been a turnover and stuff like that, and we're sort of at the moment where Beth is going to reintroduce us to all the people who are there. We've met some of them, but it's gone from the woman who is running it, Mary Maxon, has a PhD, runs PCAST, has been replaced with another woman, Debbie Stein, and we want to get her to look at it again and say, you know, why don't you try it out? And I think the trick in doing that, though, is kind of to say, this really is an essay. This is a piece of political philosophy right now. We could get it to the robust level that you want, but it's got to be taken as a prototype. So with Beth's things, it's gone through various phases, right? And now we're finally, I guess, in the third rollout of peer to patent, and it looks like it might be stay for a while. But you know, continual hacking for a number of years. Yeah.
All right, so it is after 2, but feel free to come up and ask more questions. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.